Hey guys, welcome back to Bible in the Backyard. It is crisp and chilly right here in good old Georgia. I know last time we talked about how David's plan for safety was, and it was about using his friends and using his best friend Jonathan and his wife as to kind of get him away. And so where we left off, Jonathan was going back to his father's house or his house, and David was leaving. David was leaving the city. And we're in 1 Samuel, chapter 21, and we're starting with the first verse, and we might do a couple chapters here, and then on Wednesday I'll finish it out with the next two chapters. But this is interesting. David's interesting in this story right here because I read it, and I read the places that he was going, and it confused me and it does sometimes. Sometimes the Bible can be a little bit confusing to read, and I understand completely. So I was using my notes down here and trying to understand what did that just say, what I just read. I need it broken down a little bit more. And that's okay. So hopefully this makes sense. Please excuse my reading of cities and places because that's hard in here. So we're going to talk about David. We're going to talk about his character and how he kind of runs from Saul, but to the Lord at the same time. So in chapter 21, verse 1, in 1 Samuel, it says, "Then came David to Nob to Amalek the priest, and Amalek was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? David said unto Amalek the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know of anything of this business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such place." Basically, David had to be quick on his feet to be able to make this believable. In verse 3 it says, "Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present." And the priest answered David and said, "There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, and that the young men have kept themselves at least from women." And David answered the priest and said unto him, "Of a truth women have been kept from us about these 3 days, since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel." So the priest gave him the hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but shewbread, and it was taken from before the Lord, and to put on hot bread on the day that it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest and the herdmen that belonged to Saul. So Doeg is a servant of Saul, and we talked about how basically Saul told his entire household that he was to kill David. Basically David's the enemy, David's the madman, he's the one that's not here, he's the one, whatnot. We want him gone. So Doeg saw David, and he is still a person that belongs to Saul. In verse 8 it says, "And David said unto Amalek, Is there not here under thine hand a spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." So he didn't have time to go back and get his stuff and then leave again. He had to leave from where he was at and he had nothing. And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slayest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, and there is no other save that here. There is no reason for it to be here. You take it." And David said, "There is none like that. Give it me." And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish the king of Gath. So he fled because he saw Doeg, and he knew that somehow it's going to get back to Saul that he was there. So he ran to Gath. And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is it not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him dancings, and saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish the king of Gath. So, because he was afraid of this, he completely changed his behavior. In verse 13 it says, And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the door of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. And then Achish said unto his servants, Lo, ye see, this man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Why have you brought this crazy person to me? I do not understand. Have I need of this madman? That ye have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? Why is he here? He's acting insane. Why did you bring him here? And so David had to kind of act quick on his feet, because he didn't want to be caught in a circumstance where, one, he didn't have the upper hand, and then two, it didn't get back to Saul, because he was afraid of Gath, because that's where Goliath and the Philistines came from, was Gath. So he had a right to be kind of afraid of them. So he completely changed his behavior to be able to get out of the situation. In verse 22, in chapter 22, verse 1, it continues the story. And it says, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So he didn't necessarily really try to gather people. It just kind of happened that David was his army captain. He was a leader of armies, and so these people basically came together, and they were like, I'm upset with this. I'm upset with the way that Saul's running things. I'm going to follow you now. So David kind of gathered this army without necessarily having to try to gather this army. In verse 3 it says, And David went thence to Mizpeh of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them down before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while that David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said unto David, Abide not in the hold, depart, and get thee into the land of Judah. Then David departed and came into the forest of Hereth. And so, this is kind of when Saul loses it. Like, he just absolutely loses his mind. And we already knew that he was going mad, and we already read that, and we already kind of discussed it. But this is a further indignation that he has completely lost his cool, or his chill, or whatever you want to say, however you want to call it. In verse 6, it says, When Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having a spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. So he's just chilling with a sword in his hand, like it was normal. It's not normal. In any circumstance, it's not. In verse 7, it says, Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showeth me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as at this day. Then answered Doeg, the Edomite, who saw David earlier. Remember? So in verse 9 it says, Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Amalek, the son of Ahitub. Please excuse my reading. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So now David is no longer hungry. He is also armed. The king sent to call Amalek the priest and his son Ahitub, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, and the priests that were in Nob, and they came, all of them, to the king. And Saul said, Hear now, thou son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here am I, my lord. And Saul said unto him, Why have you conspired against me, thou and the son of Jesse? And thou hast given him bread and a sword, and hast inquired of God for him, that he should arise against me to lay in wait at this day? Then Amalek answered the king, and said, And who is so faithful among all thy servants as David, which is the king's son-in-law, and goeth at thy bidding, and is honorable in thine house? So Amalek is like, he's an honorable servant. Like, he serves you. He's your son-in-law. He goes at your bidding whenever you want him to go, wherever you want him to go. He does that. Then I then begin to inquire of God for him. Be it far from me. Let not the king impute anything unto his servant, nor to all the house of my fathers, for thy servant knew nothing of all this, less or more. And the king said, Thou shalt surely die, Amalek, thou and all thy father's house. And the king said in verse 17 unto the footmen that stood about him, Turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David. Anybody who is with David needs to die also. Their hand is also with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. Then, in verse 18, it says, And the king said to Doeg, Turn thou and fall upon the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priest, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob the city, and the priest smote he with an edge of the sword, both men and women, children and suckling, and oxen and asses, and sheep, and with the edge of the sword. And one of the sons of Amalek, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. So he was the one that got away. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, and I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. So he had his suspicions. He had his thoughts, like, yep, that's probably what's going to happen. And then he says in verse 23, he says, Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. So David now has an army. He has Abiathar. And there's more to the story that we'll go into on Wednesday. But David doesn't want to do any harm to Saul. David doesn't necessarily understand what's going on with Saul either. He wants to help Saul. I think because it's... I kind of believe that he wants to help Saul, but he also wants to protect himself. So this is why he's running. This is why he's this and this, that, and the other. So Saul, on the outside looking in, it's crazy. Just a little bit. And he's losing his mind, but he's also being very, very, very obsessive. He's not necessarily thinking clearly and thinking straight. And I think that's a lesson that we can learn just from this, that, and the other. Something goes wrong in our lives, and we tend to blame other people and blame this and blame that. Sometimes it is somebody else's fault, but then also you have to look internally and go, okay, what could I have done to do that? But then it's also, it's out of your hands. You can only control so much. You can only kind of control what happens to you and how you react to it. And whatnot. And Saul's trying to obsessively control every little thing that happens in David's life and his life and the people that are around him. And he thinks that if you're not necessarily, if you're playing Switzerland, if you aren't going to choose any side, then you're against him. It doesn't matter. If you're not going to choose any side, then you're officially against Saul and you're with David. And I think that Amalek showed that he was very, very, very much like, I haven't done anything wrong. Like, I'm following what I need to follow, and I'm going to serve you, and I'm also going to serve David because he's your son-in-law. You chose, to do this. And it wasn't necessarily Amalek's fault. He just, he told Saul what he thought, and he was like, did I not do the right thing? And Saul was like, no, because you didn't tell me where he was, and whatnot. So being obsessive about something is not necessarily always healthy for a mind, because that's all you think about. That's all that takes up space in your brain, and whatnot. So we'll see in the next couple chapters what David does with Saul when the two do come to a head, because it's probably different than what you think, and whatnot. Because at this point, if I was running from somebody, if somebody wanted to hurt me, I'd want to try to protect myself and hurt them back. Not saying don't do that, but David hasn't done anything wrong to this point, so he's still trying to figure out what's going on. So I would want to help that person and want to, and whatnot. So it's just, each to his own. And so this story is getting really, really, really intense and whatnot. And so I pray that you guys have a good day, a good week, a good month, a good morning, a good evening, wherever you're at. And whatnot. So next week, or not next week, on Wednesday, I'll get into what David does to Saul and how he handles the situation that he finds himself in, and it's pretty cool. I think we can learn a lot from David and Saul, and standing on the character that David has at this point in time is quite something. It is quite something. And whatnot. So I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.